Aya yuxatini, Shlikat Johan. Yaigi dat you took the ton. Aan Ka Saax'u. Klein away, Saax'u Kutzati, Yaha Aaní Káa. Hechasagu anach sawe, Gwall Tellhastu Twa Oshguan. Hawutian. Away, Hasakawa Áak'w Saha away. Ya, Shlikatwe Aan Ka Saax'u. Ḳwáan Kutzati Yesu, Shqagwe. Yaqdan, Qiq, Llawak, Tlaq'an, Chunia, Angun, Shidka. Ye awekwa, one canins had to us, Kunachoe had to us a gwage, had to us a gunuch. Aan Ka Saax'u Ḳwáan ye. Yaha Aaní Káa. Yag we Mendenhall Kayaaní aya, Gasino Kayaaní aya, Juno Kayaaní aya, Haynes, like just ka away. Yarlingitun de tani Ḳwáasʼ Shaawát aya, Aan Ka Saax'u, like Lingit Saax'u ha Aaní Káa. Clear away wa Qiyaw da hai ख़wáasʼ Tuka ख़wáasʼ tu. Kak ख़wáasʼ Ya Áak'w. Ada away Saax'u. Áak'w ta. Aan Ka Saax'u. Qathini. Naki away we Tlesh naki dakte. We do Áak'w. Yeah, away you do a sock. Áak'w. Ya de. Akutzite akanachaya. Ya nashu. Yeah, away. Áak'w. Sit. You do a sock. Wait Clash Mendenhall like. Clash do away. Clash u. Clash hain. Áak'w. Sit. Da yeti. We sit you do a sock. Adachawe we kanadai hin. Kanachawe ya kanada. Wuch ich hin. You do a sock. Wuch ich hin. Kuk aya tlashakach kaudushkit. Wuch ich hin. We ayektewe ya kanadain. Kachtaku hin. Awe guksa. We yanda kenyak. Adachwudakin ka akachwujakak. Ta shuyi. You do a sock. Ta shuyi. Weta adach was Aan Ka gekuk. Tzatnacha we do Achsani hitti klein Fred Meyer. Awe ayanach we do she nach Chukan Ani. You do a sock. Tzatnacha we do a sha. Ǩwáasʼ Áak'w we do Ǩwáasʼ Sha nach klein aya. Yuch away. Costco dasa. Away Jashugu sit. Áak'w sit. Jashugu ataway sha dayeti. We take an a dayin. Guksa actus high. Actus high. Ǩwáasʼ atlain ǩwáasʼ sha. Joe ǩwáasʼ sha kutzati. A dayeti win a dayin. Éil. What's that do? Clash Éil. Áak'w Ţí Áak'w Tí Éak'w Ţín. Éak'w Ṭín. Éak'w Ṭín, you do a sock. Aga away, we do Shínach Éak'w Tí, we Ṭíní. Sítka, you do a sock. Sítka. Tsatnacha, we do Gusa Náakw Dakahiti. Katlach Ginny. Chawina Dayahin. Teachini. Teachini. Aan Ka Saax'u. Tsatnacha Éak'w Katlach. Shatlach. Yada Atkashe. Zanti. Katli it sha nach. Ka Zanti. Zantiki. Zantiki hini. Adachaya yan yakanadin. Yeawa Aan Ka Saax'u ayakunachike. Achtuasaku Jaltakatku has awasku. Ya kukya Facebook aya akachwasatin. Kando tu yeti kleinachka. Teslina say ya takat at singit sai aya kudziti. Akal takatas has to tuasaku klingit chinach yuchasha atki. Chakwa Tlashkaudeke. Gunalchisha iti sa achi. Yitwa gesagu yuchiyatani. Ya Aan Ka Saax'u dar qachadasa. Aqa wushin yuchagachtusha at. Tleitkach inach. Okay. What was I talking about?
You're giving place names of
Yeah, what? Of?
well everywhere down in Zantakini and Tikini.
Yeah, this is Áak'w Ḳwáan, as you call it. Áak'w.
Jagtat, Sitka.
Yeah, what? So I start off saying, I'm really thinking about names on the land. Aan Ka Saax'u. So Saax'u is the plural form of names, and it's a possessed plural form. And you're going to mix it up with hat. If you're anything like me, I say hat probably half the time. Aan Ka Saax'u. Like a hat on the village? What's going on? Aan Ka Saax'u. Names on the land. For some reason, when people came here, they tried to erase them. Hasakawa Áak'w Ḥwáan. They tried to erase them. Maybe because they didn't want us to be here. I don't know. Maybe Tlingit. I don't know why no one ever tried. You can speak Tlingit. And so there's been a lot of sort of movement recently to try and restore place names. So I've been thinking about that. I made a video the other day about names in the... I'm trying to do like this little cluster videos. Like here's this place called Áak'w, and here's some names around it. So Áak'w is a little lake. And then Áak'w Ṭá is the head of the bay. There's another one I forgot, Áak'w Nú, kind of in between, well, I guess the head of the bay and heading towards the ferry terminal. There's a spot called Áak'w Nú, the fort at Áak'w. And then Áak'w is inland, and so it's behind, but it's also inland, right? So if you're standing on the near the ocean and you look up something further upland, that's Áak'w. So Áak'w is the name of the valley behind, the whole valley behind Áak'w. And then there's a glacier back there called Ḳwáan. So Áak'w Ḥwáan. So I made a video and I've got a little, I don't think you can see it, I got a little puppet there that a friend of mine made me. And my kids get very excited. At least they got really excited when it came here because they said it was a daddy puppy. He's got long hair and he wears similar shirts to what I wear. But in the video I made, you could kind of see it. And I think when I said Áak'w, sit, I said, I made some mistake. I was like, do I cut this? I was like, no, I gotta leave it because everybody makes mistakes. So then you'll see there's a little thought bubble that comes off the little puppet and it says clum, which is like saying whoops. I've heard clum and clut to say whoops. And anyway, so then Sit is the name of the lake around in front of that glacier. And then flowing from that lake is Untitled, the river that runs itself murky. Or it's like murky together river. It's like kind of really how the grammar works. X'éig is silty or murky, or there's a related verb to change a little bit, and it's for fish to spawn, especially herring. Because herring just murky up the whole water, right? And then there's a river that flows into that one called Káayaaní, which is a river that runs clear. And so Káayaaní is for the sediments to settle in a body of water. Then I kind of was just sort of taking a mental journey from that part of town towards downtown. And as you're going where the airport is, where the planes where they take off and land, the flying boats, it's Ta-shu-yi. So that's like a tide flats, Ta-shu-yi. And I think the difference for Ta-shu-yi would be like an area where grass grows, but the water comes over it. Whereas X'éig would be the muddy part of a tide flat. So we got different names because you got to know that kind of stuff. Like, what can you get there? What do you need to know about it? And can't pitch up tent just because there's grass, right? Because you might wake up in the water. Then heading towards past my uncle's big house, Fred Meyer, on the right-hand side, you'll hit Ţukaanání, grassland. And then there's when you hit the channel in between Juneau and Douglas is called Sitka. And then on the left-hand side, you have Ţax'étungin. That's the name of the mountain. I guess some people call it Thunder Mountain. So then they were wanting me to translate Thunder Mountain for the school. And I said, no, you got to say Ţax'étungin. You can't just invent a name and then have us translate that name when there's already a name there. And then on the other side of that, you have Shaanach'tlainn, Big Valley. And then it's the same glacier, so it's still called Áak'w. We know it's the same glacier, it wraps around. And then I was having trouble remembering this one. It's Áak'w Ḳwáan. Áak'w is a slough. Gut is an uprising of warm water, which you get like these geothermal beds in some of the rivers. That's where all the eagles hang out in the wintertime. You got that up in, there's a gut up in Jilkhat, which is why because what happens is salmon like really cold water, but then when it's in the winter and you have salmon that just hang out in the rivers in the winter, they like to have a pretty warm spring, especially around November. And so it's not really like a hot spring, it's just a warm uprising and so that's what brings the dog salmon in November, and that's what's going to bring all the eagles. So you have like huge gatherings. They gathered there before there was the dump, a Dexachai, place where people dump things. And then heading down, you get into where the hospital is, and that's called Catlach Ginny, the arm of the mold on top of it. Because the mountain that connects to those little ridges is called Catlach, moldy top. And then next to that, you have Shaawát, which is Moldy Mountain. Then on the other side of that, heading towards downtown, you have Áak'w. And then you have Zanti, and Zanti is the hill just above where the capital is. And that hill is also called Zanti. And Zanti is the base of that hill, and Kayaaní is the river at the base of Zanti, of the flounder. Because it looks like a flounder, I guess, when you look at it. Going back in that valley, where they've had there's some avalanches, I guess, that went on back there, is Ḳwáan Sparkling Valley. And then I think I left off there. Just like, I was like, that was enough. So that was what I talked about. Okay. So I thought I'd show you folks, just for fun, some things we were working on in the language nests, because I think it's fun to see what's everybody trying to figure out. And I know we had talked in here about handling verbs. And so I'm going to show you some handling verbs, but also just a few other things that we were working on in the nest. So on Mondays, we bring Ḳwáasʼ Florence Shakely in. We just sort of ask questions, like whatever the language teachers are thinking about and trying to figure out. And then I come to sort of just be a part of what they're doing and to write down what they're saying. And so they were doing a number of different things. But one of the neat things was they're taking these large plastic trays and they take just a bunch of stuff, fabric, these kind of cool, looks like someone took a very sparkly piece of paper and put it through a shredder. So it's like very long, sparkly kind of pieces of paper. And cotton balls and little pieces of glass, like little glass, like rock looking things. And they just got a whole bunch of miscellaneous things. And then they have the kids take it and make a story using very abstract sort of imagery. It's very fun. They're using paper clips for the shoreline and just a little brown triangle of fabric for a bear. And so we're getting some things on like, and it's interesting because in English you can make a lot of things. Make a story. Hey, we're going to make this story. We're going to, like I said when I was talking, I said I made a movie, and I was like, I didn't make it, I wrote it, right? And so you got to pick the different verbs sometimes in Tlingit, because you could say X'éig would be to make something, but that's to build it. It's like you constructed a physical thing. Although you could also use it to say, I used this thing for this thing, right? I used a rock for a chair or whatever. That could use X'éig, but in a different way. So when we got into that, we asked the speaker about that, and we were saying Shkashnik Gachtu X'éig, and she's like, X'éig, a story. So she said Kagachtunik, we're going to tell it, and then Kagachtuchanik, we're going to tell a story. So there are some differences. So there's a couple things you folks should notice here. When the classifier switches in this case, you're going from telling information to telling a story. And then you can say whoosh, oops, yeah, there it is, shkanachtuchnik. Let's tell each other stories. So these are just getting to some variations of, in this case, two similar verbs, but you got two forms of this verb. And then there's some other things that go on in here with this reflexive pronoun, which are kind of interesting when you go from telling the story of it to just telling a story. So that's the thing, is you can kick that object out of it. And then we got a long sentence. Hatuwasaku shkashnik hawakshiyik yesene yatakak yatatin. Hatuwasagu, we want. Shkashnik, a story. Hawakshiyik, before our eyes. Yesene, for you to do it. So that becomes to demonstrate. So wakshiyik yesene. Yatakak, yatakak. In that, Yatatin, with this. And yata and waita, those can be singular or plural types of things. So you could say in this or in these, with this or with these. It just depends on how you're using it. One of the teachers was telling the story of Qis'awa and Tan. Tan Qis'awa Shkashni. Beautiful story. And it was really well done. And then there was a phrase that we were trying to get, which is, I will put rocks inside you, which is what the ptarmigan does to the sea lion. Te ikakade yikakwasani. And this is a handling verb. I'm going to put I'm going to put them all, right? A bunch of them, or in some cases, a bunch of different things. Akade was interesting, like it's on your mouth. It's really interesting. And then is open your mouth. Full of ejectives. So you have apostrophe, apostrophe, apostrophe. No apostrophe. It can get a little tricky. Then we couldn't remember the word for, one of us couldn't remember the word for iceberg. So it's hot. And then we're trying to teach kids how to, there's all these things that are really interesting in Tlingit, like push your foot into a boot and push your hand, like especially if you're dealing with kids, you gotta tell them all kinds of stuff, right? You don't have to tell this, you usually don't have to tell that to adults, you know, but I don't know, maybe an adult's walking around with their glove halfway on. For some reason you need to tell them that. But for kids, you have to do this stuff all the time. And especially if you're helping them, you're putting, it's hard because you can't feel where the fingers are and stuff. So a yich, oh, whoops, I jumped ahead. So before I get to that, put them all back in it. A yich kuch kaijesh. So a yich would be in it. Kuch is returned or coming back, sometimes moving backwards. Kaijesh, another handling verb for doing, and it depends. It's either doing different things in multiple trips or doing all of a single type of thing. Kind of depends on how it's being used. Then push your hand in the glove. Saax'u jinisha. So that's pushing your hand forward. So you're pushing your hand. The movement has to do with like moving forward. I think this is the same verb for like a glacier to move forward and stuff, which is really why I wouldn't have predicted this, which is really fun. And then the one for put your foot into the boot doesn't even have a verb. Kayaaní It just, so your boot, your along your foot. That's really what you've got. You could say itayek, but that's saying pull your boot up over your foot. That's how you say put your boot on. But we were telling her, it's like we're pushing the boot. And so it becomes different because that itayek means to pull something up. So it just gets very specific sometimes. And then if we wanted a kid to lift their foot up so that we can put their boot on, Ixus K Satan. That is another, these are what we call handling verbs. So what you have here, and we're going to look at them below, this is a stick-like object. So this could work as well for lift the fishing pole up, K Satan. We also talked about, and you might see it. So this is a place name, Tlach Satan. Oops. What am I doing? Tlach Satanjin. So when you hear Tlach Satanjin, like it all runs together, right? But there are three things here. What do you folks think those three things are?
I know the answer to this because I'm the school that you wrote it for, so I won't say anything.
But you could have done it and like asked it like a question. Isn't it maybe?
Is it Tlach Satan Jin.
That is correct. So those are the three parts, right? So we have tlach, satan, jin. This satan is the same one as this satan. However, and people were getting very mad at me the other day. Well, I don't think they're getting mad at me. They're just getting, some people who really like grammar and stuff, they get really frustrated. Like to lay and to lie. And so Tlingit does this as well. Like this is a different form than this. This is for it to move, and this is for it to be lying there. So, what is tlach? Do we know what tlach is?
Isn't it very?
Very, right? So tlach is very. Qunach is really. They do very similar things. You could say tlach qunach, very, really, yake. Very, really good, right? So tlach is very. Jin is a hand or an arm. Depends on how it's being used. Like I would, if someone says jin, I think hand. But then if I listen more, I was like, okay, that one's arm. Okay. Same with chuz. Chuz could be leg. Chuz could be foot. If I hear someone say chuz, I think of foot. But then if I figure, I was like, oh, okay, they're talking about the leg. So then we get satan, a stick-like object to be lying there. Tlach, satan, jin. It's a hand that's really lying there. So this is sometimes interpreted as hands at rest. There is a second meaning, which is does not masturbate. And someone must have leaked this because this name was the first one that we put onto the official place name registry that has one of these special characters. So that underlying character is in the official list of names. So someone from a news company called me and they're trying to fish a story out. And so the first story they were trying to fish out was the Tlingit language people are fighting with this family that wants to put their father's name on the mountain. I'm like, no, that wasn't the case. We just heard about it and we were able to contact them. And they said, no, that was his friend's idea. He would not want that. He would love to have the Tlingit name restored. So there was no big fight. So the next news story that they were maybe looking for was that, yeah, this was the first to have this underlined character on there in Tlingit country anyways. But then they must have heard from somewhere like, hey, there's this other interpretation of the name. So I stone cold lied to that reporter because they called me and we were celebrating this, the restoration of a Tlingit place name. And he says, what does it mean? I said, well, it's tlach satan jin. It's a hand at rest. And if you say it really fast, it almost sounds like there's satunch or something like that. And so, but he says, I heard that there was like another interpretation of it. I said, I don't know anything about that. Because if I said does not masturbate, that would go to print and then everybody would laugh and they wouldn't let us name anything. They wouldn't let us restore any of our names because they're just, I'm suspicious that people are ready to judge us. So scrub this from the recording. I'm just kidding.
I
Okay.
swear I did not tell the children that second definition.
And so I thought about this stuff too because, oh, another thing I said when I was speaking Tlingit, I saw on Facebook that some people are very mad. Well, I don't know. They're just complaining because there's a proposal to rename Riverbend Elementary School Áak'w Ḥwáan. And there are two previous schools in Juneau that have adopted a Tlingit name, which is sort of also known as X'éig and Yadaat Kache, and I think Sit Itisha Nach. But to just say this is a full replacement, we're retiring the old name. That's what Riverbend is looking at doing. And so the same kind of racist statements typically come out, like they just made up this alphabet and nobody can pronounce it. And so I was arguing with people right before class. In a kind way, I try to be really kind and not make fun of people. But then sometimes I'll say, oh, am I nobody? Are all the students learning Tlingit right now nobody? Are all the Tlingit people who speak Tlingit nobody? And then someone said, this is a leftist agenda. I was like, is speaking Tlingit leftist? Because what is rightist then? Is that genocide? So anyways, I was laughing about that because, and someone said, they're trying to be dramatic, and they said, it won't be long till every place has a Tlingit name. And they're going to make everybody speak Tlingit. I was like, well, not bad. Okay. The fear of speaking Tlingit. So we're not going to do all the handling verbs, but we are going to take a look at some of them. And I'm going to tell you there's two main parts to a handling verb. One is kind of in this box, which is what type of motion is it? We're going to get to that. But there are, for starters, there's a type of motion that has an end, and there's a type of motion that's ongoing. And the ones that have a specific end, those are zero conjugation verbs. So that's why when you, so the verb wugut, to walk, you could tell it's zero because you say ha gu, right? And so that's ha gu. And you also say nech gu. So the command of that verb is gu. The first part, ha and nech, are saying where to. But if you use that same verb to walk and you said go over there, you'd say way de na gu. So now it switches to na. And you'd also say yadach na gu. Get away from there. So that's one of these are motion verbs. And motion verbs are probably the most complicated verbs. Because, you know, we've talked before, there are 4 conjugation types, 0, na, ga, qa. They're all associated with meaning, and a motion verb can change between any of the 4. They can do that. So that's one of the magic things. It's like whatever the type of motion you claim, that's going to trigger what the verb to switch its conjugation type. So these are all zeros because of this letter T. Ach, jeet. To my possession. Ach, jeet. So if you say ach, ji, it's not my hand, even though I'm using my hand. It means my possession. We've seen this before, but we put a different suffix on it. Ach, ji, wu. Oops, why did I underline? So ach, ji, wu. The suffix here is wu, located at. It's at my possession. Again, I don't have to be holding it. I could say yak ach jiwu. I have a boat. Doesn't mean I'm walking around carrying a boat, right? It has to do with possession. So once we change it to letter T, ach jeet, that pushes the motion verb to a 0 conjugation. Then you just say, in some cases, just the root, because what you're getting here, even though you don't hear it, there's the conjugation prefix, there's the classifier, then there's the root. So even though you have those 3 things, you're only saying and hearing one of them. So so that's the first part, is the motion, the type of motion. The second part is
Renee, before you go to the second part, I was madly trying to type what you were saying. So you said there are 2 types of handling verbs: those that have an end, it ends, and those that are ongoing. And so this ach jeet, that means it's ending, right? Because it's arrived somewhere. And so that kind of verb gets the use of the na only, correct?
so the ones that have, so yeah, if you said ach ji de, then it would be na. Or if you said ach ji dach, that would also be na. But jeet is 0. So there is
And
a
it's 0 because it's a ongoing, or it's an, did I get that right? That the na is for
0 has a specified endpoint. It has a goal. So you could say made it or didn't. So it's a lot of people will call it sort of goal oriented. The fancy name for that is telic. And then let's see where I have these. So I do have, so let's jump to X'éig hayuqatangi. So also I'm thinking of these last 2 weeks. It's like I must give them everything. So we will be sort of talking about some kind of more difficult things because I want to give you some light summer reading. Read about verb conjugation and all this fun stuff on hot sunny days on a beach. Wonderful. So this is chapter 17. It's near the end of the text and it talks about motion verbs. So let me get rid of this and zoom in a little bit. Oops. So na and 0 are the most common. Lots of those. There's a whole bunch of them. Na means there's not a specified end. You're just saying, go that way. And that's all you're saying. It doesn't mean go that way forever. It just means that's all I'm saying is go that way. But for a 0, I'm saying go over there. And that means you have an arrival area. There's a goal involved. There's a specific ending. And then ga and qa are upwards and downwards. So those are your 4 sort of major types of motion in Lingi. Something that comes to an end, 0. Something that just keeps going, na. Or there's just no specified end. It's all about just getting that direction. And then upwards and downwards, ga and qa. They tend to make the most sense in the motion verbs because you might get some where you're like, why is that qa? Why is seeing someone qa? I guess I'm not taller than everybody, right? So, but then the motion verbs usually kind of make sense. If you're saying go upwards, you would say qa, and go downwards, you would say qa. So as you go through, it's all about the preverb. So the preverb is a spot right before the verb where you can specify what the motion is. And these are complicated, but there's a whole bunch of this. You kind of get into a bunch of these tables. But what you're looking at is the underline X or day. And this, even though the T is in here, it's a little bit misleading because it's usually for like ut. Ut yanakut, they're walking around. Ut nagu, walk around. Well, if I say ut gu, walk to it. So these are very, there's not a lot of things that separate some of these concepts. They start to kind of blur together sometimes. But as far as these kind of 0 ones, like for this one, so these are 0. So the T, for example, if I was going to say hit day, so this is these are the na, which are down further. Anyways, what am I trying to say here? I wasn't ready for this. But if I said hit day nagu, go towards the house. But if I said go to the house, and it was important, like let's say I needed you to arrive at the house for some reason, like you're a kid, right? And let's say it's getting late and I'm on the phone, I won't be home for a little while, and I need you to know that you need to go to the house, not just go walk around the house or anything. So I could say hit go to that. You should be touching the house, right? And so there's a whole sort of set of these. Neich, to go into a building. Neich hot, to arrive somewhere. And the key, so like especially like looking at a third person perfective, I would say we de wugut. They went that way. But if they arrived here, I'd say hot uwagut. So it changes, goes from wugut to uwagut. So would the second person. I'd say wayday yigut. You went over there. Hot iagut. This one, it takes a little while to sort of figure out. But basically, you see these ones, and some of them are really common. Like, for example, Yéil, the letter T, hot, any of those kuch verbs. And then we'll jump down to and then there's some that aren't very common. But, moving down to the shore. Yéil wugut. But if they did make it to the shore, like from that mosquito story, you'd say Yéil uwagut. Qanay, starting to, emerging from the shadows. Dak uwagut, they came out. Gaki uwagut, they emerged, like they walked out of a hole or something. And then it gives some examples to show how they change, right? So the big thing is that it's short and high. Gut. When we go down to the na verbs, de, dach, nach, nak, ka, all of those suffixes are going to be na conjugation. We de nagu, we dach nagu, we nach nagu, anak nagu, leave it behind. Aqa nagu, go after it. Those will all be na. And then there's some others too, and then it gives examples of those. Okay, back to
Jeez.
and this is a concept that does take a while, but you don't have to understand exactly how motion verbs work to get this. All you need to know is it starts with achjit, to my possession. Oops. Then the second part is we have categories of objects, which tells us how to carry them. Okay? So the first one is ti. This is compact objects and abstract concepts, like time, or hajit ti hayuchatangi, give us our language, right? Or you could say hajitas awati hayuchatangi, they gave us our language. And you're talking about like our ancestors. Hasjujidegachtuti, we're going to give it to our future generations. So what you see here is the achjit part, that's category 1. Category 2 is you pick the verb achjit ti, achjit kati, achjit tan, achjit sa'in, achjit ach, achjit satan, achjit kasatan, achjit jiksati, achjit kajel, achjit yenasne. This isn't all of them, but these are probably some of the most useful ones. Then you have noun examples: rock, apple, box, water in a glass, hand towel, fishing pole, pencil, rope, uncoiled rope. All those things, all the beds, and then different things. So the categories here are compact or general object, round, spherical object, empty container, container with contents in it, fabric that is large enough, it can't be like a little tiny piece of felt. It's got to be big enough that it'll be floppy, right? So what it's all about is how you have to carry it. A stick-like object, Yeah, a stick-like object. A stick-like object that you can carry with one hand. Uncoiled rope. There's also coiled rope, and there's also grabbing rope by the end of it, by the head of the rope. All of one type of things, or things that are going to require several different trips back and forth. And then multiple different things. That's the kind of key for the handling verbs.
Renee,
Oh,
is it grammatically correct to say achchite without saying wete?
yeah, if you're pointing at it, right? Which is basically saying, hand it to me.
So in this example, the third column is there mostly to illustrate the kinds of things that are being referred to by the second column?
Yes, it's showing you an example. And then going back to Hausaneach Hayukatangi, there is a chapter. I always got to look up handling. So there is a section that has these as well, which is right at the end of, I don't know what chapter I'm in, the root and the stem. So this one gives, shows the prefix, the classifier, the root, the example, the translation, and what the methodology is behind the classification. So what it's going to do, it's going to start adding prefixes and changing the classifier. That's the way it's going to handle creating all of these different categories. And so this one has more. So you also have a simple stick-like object, a long stick-like object, a living creature, a dead creature, or sleeping baby, or unconscious thing. Fabric, a bundle of things like a stack of towels, because you got to carry that different, right? You got to kind of put one hand here, one hand there. Or you got to just carry it so it doesn't tip over. Baggage and personal belongings, all of one type of thing, and then several of things that take several trips, sorry.
So would people oftentimes leave the way with the noun off, since the verb tells you the, if the object's there, tells you the shape?
Yeah, yeah. And sometimes you'll have elders who use kind of surprising versions of it, right? So like we go up here and we see in, hand me something with contents in it. And an elder said, in hin. I was like, what? And she said, in hin. I was like, oh, okay. So she was saying, put water to my mouth, which was get me a cup of water. But I was learning these as if it didn't start with achjit, my mind wasn't ready. That was the trigger for me. As soon as I heard achjit, my mind's like all the verbs, trying to think of all the categories. Because we kept hearing, when we were learning Tlingit, we kept hearing these. And we're like, huh? Mystical. And then you look into the verb dictionary and they got like a million carrying verbs. Like, for example, if you want to see these in another form, because you enjoy torturing yourself, maybe. In the dictionary, so I just categorize them as, if you look up in English and you look up carry, it starts here and it ends over there. So you got a bunch, right? And so, but this is an interesting way to look at it as well, because some of them, it's all under the same verb root, and then you have 3 or 4 different verbs within that root for different types of things. And there's a lot, right? Because then you also have totally different, like packing on your back and carrying in your mouth. And so if you have a dog, like it'll switch to Yéil, because they're carrying it in their mouth. So
Renee, I should know this, but for a gja, because it's a closed container but hollow, I'm thinking that for like guitar and all of these other sort of stringed instruments. Sati.
I would use sati because it's so the thing about the complex object is you have to think about how to carry it so you don't mess it up. But I would use this one for a phone. I would use it for a belt, a chair, a violin. And then you can bring them different places. You could pick them up, you could put them, and then the motion starts to change, right? So for example, it would say, Áak'w Káa draw a card. We're playing cards. Áak'w, off of it. K, upwards. One or some of them. Gáte, lift it upwards. Ḥwáan Aaní, the gambling paper.
So what makes it a complex object? It's because it can be handled in many different ways.
It has moving parts. So when you're carrying a violin, you want to be careful not to touch the tuning keys or and there's tuning parts on it. And so you have to sort of, because it all comes down to how you carry it. And so with sati, it's just saying, be mindful how you carry that thing. Which in Tlingit is just saying like, carry it right, Which you might have to say to kids, right? You end up teaching them with paper violins and stuff. You say, you learn how to carry this. What are you doing? Just doing all chawasa. We're not going to do this just recklessly. So, scolding, light scolding in the Tlingit school. We just got to remember how to do that. Okay, it's a pretty complex subject. I know you folks have brought it up before too. And then there's a lot of people who just say, I'll just never ask for anything. So, but I think you start with, there's a couple things. I think you start with just a couple things, right? Or maybe you put 4 things up there. And then you'll say, and I made, if you go to gamecrafter.com, I made a card game for this that probably has most of these. And so the way the card game kind of works is everybody draws, you separate them from nouns and phrases. And everybody draws like a set of like maybe 8 nouns. And then you got 8 nouns and they're color coded, which kind of helps. But someone will lay down, like let's say if you drew Áak'w and te and this uncoiled tik and Kayaaní. You had these coiled Kayaaní, right? Let's say you had these things. And then someone played a card, so then someone would turn over, you take turns turning over the phrase, and it would say Achjit Kati way, and you would slap down Áak'w. And if you're the first one, you get rid of a noun. The goal is to get rid of the nouns. But then they need to match, because if you slap down Kees, then you got to pick up your noun and draw a new one. That's because we're just using them to just practice. And then one of the students said, how do I win? I need to win. So we made up some rules for it. And that's what we came up with. Okay. Take a break. Okay, come back in 8 minutes. Jeez. So a couple things. Maybe some of you folks got this Tlingit verb components board game. But there's no real, there's some people who have, and then they wrote me, they're like, what do I do? I was like, well, I'm trying to figure it out. So, but this is probably going to be the next publication that I complete. And it's going to be basically a color-coded breakdown of how all of these different parts work, showing you the most common ones. Because some of them, like this one, the thematic, it could go maybe forever. Who knows? There's probably 50 or 60 of them total. and I don't show all of them. The preverbs probably also endless, you know, and so. But what this will go through is there'll be a section. I'll put this up. It's a draft form. Expect typos and incompletion. But I'm basically just trying to write this thing from left to right in terms of what you see first and give a whole bunch of examples. For example, like here's the verb yati, which I think a lot of us should know by this point. So yati is for something to be. And then what I'm trying to show is if you put different things in the preverb, sometimes you're changing the meaning and sometimes you're creating a whole different verb, right? So for example, with yati, you can have yeyati, that's how it is. Kash ye uti, that's not how it is. Yeyati, it is there. Du'in yati, it affects them. Itina khatyati, I need it, so that should say it. There's one I didn't fix yesterday. I need it. Oops, that's a highlighter button. Okay. Ykayání, it is overpowering me. And you got to make sure that this says Kayaaní, because you could say a funny phrase like Kayaaní Áak'w. My pee is overpowering me, which means like I have to pee very bad. Which sometimes you need to communicate this stuff. Sort of like, we can't mess around. We got to find a spot. So, but if you accidentally said Ykayání, then you're saying my pee is going over me. And so like very, very different things. Okay. Kayaaní, it is still, it is calm. And look at how many of these are just using the same yati verb. And now the whole meaning is shifting. Ituqayati, it's acceptable to you. I'idach shtuqa khatati, I am grateful to you. Let me check the chat. Dutun khatyati, I am concerned about them. Ye'awe achtuwuyati, that's how I feel about it. Achtuwu tliyayati, I am meditating. My thoughts are calm. Ituq yayati, you bear it in mind. Akhwaqshiyikh yayati, you appeared before my eyes. Dukhanq yehayati, we are visiting them. X'éig yati, they are obedient to me. Kushechwa yachhas yati, they are all like walruses. That one was in the verb dictionary. That was kind of neat. I don't know. So what are we talking about? But that's what this, and so it gives some examples to see like this is how the preverb can affect the verb, and then it lists what the preverb is over here, its individual meaning, and then it goes through and it starts listing. There's kind of these spots, and this is something I haven't fully figured out yet. So I only separated them by this thick line. But if you got this thick line and then a blank right here, that means you can kind of only pick one of these things. You can't have 3 or 4 of these. It's like you've already locked up that spot. Like this one. You can have clash or shish, but you can't have both. I don't think. And then here's ones that go towards. Here's very. Here's really. So you can have very really. And you can have very too much. And you can have very lost. But you can't have really lost. I don't think. But maybe. I'll probably say this and then go find an example 20 minutes from now that flies in the face of it. Starting, beginning. Then there's adverbs. And then there's a whole table full of common adverbs. Not every adverb. Quite a few of them after this. Then you get a whole set that's more linked. That starts to get a little bit more linked to the grammatical function of what you're saying. To completion, returning, wrongly, mistake. Oh, I gotta add yach up here. That's another one. Out to sea, into the inland, mistakenly. And then these ones, pushing something into a progressive mode, which could be K or yay. These ones also will pop up in the future for certain conjugation types. You and yay. And then we get some that are actually, these are getting into object pronouns as well. So some of them will pop up under two categories, right? Just in terms of like, I would keep this as a little green tile, but I'll also have an explanation and some examples in the object section. Has and dach, and then we get a whole list of adverbs and just sort of says, here's what it is, here's what it translates to, here's how it kind of works. So there's this section, and then it moves into objects, and it has a pretty thorough explanation. And thanks to some of you and your feedback, it talks about indirect objects and direct objects and how they all work and whether they're connected to the verb. And it gives examples, and it's color-coded. So check it out. I'll put it up on our page, and I will get to the thematic prefix before we move into our story, because I do want to talk about that for a second. So we had kind of talked through what generally a preverb is, what an object is. Then we get to this thing that we call the thematic prefix, which is basically attaching a noun or a specific concept to the verb. And if you put something here or take something away, it's a whole different verb. You can't just add it and it just becomes a totally different verb. But basically you have these 4 spots. So you can have up to 4 of them, but you can only pick the things from these spots. So these ones don't have very many things in it. Spot number 1 has k, which has to do with a given space, and ka, compared to. Spot number 2 is a whole bunch of nouns. And there's way more than this. If you want to see the complete list, I think James Crippen has them all. And it includes hunger and vomits and feet and hands. A whole bunch of stuff can go in here, but you can only have one of them. So you can't say jitu or tusa or shada. Like you just can't. They just get locked up. Then you have the next one, the third one, ka, spherical, or ya, vertical surface. And then the fourth one, ka, horizontal surface. So you could have 4 of these. It's very uncommon. 1 happens quite a bit. 2, now and then. 3, not very often. 4, very rarely. So for some examples of how these affect the verbs, so let's look at spot number 1, k and ka. So sometimes it's talking about weather, but sometimes it's talking about like in a given area or space. So for example, you have Áak'w, they are good or it is good. If you put k on that, good weather. Yéil, they are that way. Ḳugáasʼ, they exist. Áak'w Ḥwáan, they disappeared. Áak'w Ḥwáan, the time has come for it. The compared to one, you can have yagé, big or many. Yékugé, this big. Sikak, it is thick. Yéksikak, it is this thick, like a board. Right? Nashe, it is far. Yékunashe, it is this far. So this one is comparing things, like saying it's this big. It's 10 miles, right? Or something like that. There's 6 houses there. So that's when that's going to pop up. Category number 2. These all have meaning, like hand, inside, the neck, the nose or point, around, an opening or the mouth, the head or the top of something, the end of something. And this one we'll talk about later. It's just, we call it, it's just puts the focus on the action of the verb. And it just doesn't go away. Like áak'w Ďagáin, it's just frozen on there. X'éig, it's frozen on. So, Yéil, working. Tunk, thinking. Ach, heard a voice. Llwgáasʼ, the point of like a pencil got worn down. Or llwgáasʼ, sorry. Yéil, they tell it. Tunk, speaking. Shaawát, they clubbed him on the head. X'éig, it ran out or it died off. X'éig, they are dancing. 3 and 4, spherical or the vertical surface, also the horizontal surface. Kayaaní, throwing it. Áak'w Ḳwáan, throwing a round thing. Áak'w Ţákw, the cat, scratched their hand, or my hand, And then Áak'w Ṭákw, the cat scratched their face. So scratching something, and then specifically scratching the face. And gouache is another good one, because it has, you can have the horizontal surface or the vertical surface. Gao awa gouache, they beat the drum. Nadak akawa gouache, they knocked on the table. Ayawa gouache, they punched them in the face. Those are, and you'll see them. And for now, I would just say start spotting them, start noticing that they are there. Start looking, the ka and the ya, the vertical and the horizontal, those are the most common, I think. And then you'll see the others that just start popping up. Questions?
When I was doing one of the translation exercises before, there's a bunch of cuz, so it's either spherical or horizontal or compared to. Is there a way to suss that out when you come across a word that you haven't seen before? Like a process to help you figure out which one of those it is?
That's a good question. I think 90% of the time it's the horizontal surface. Like it's almost always that. But then when you look at the meaning, or if it seems like there's some sort of like a basketball or something, then you might sort of figure out that it's that. When you have the comparative one, it pretty much always has this other thing that pops up here that we call the irialis, which is a U sound. That's where you go ku gay, and this k sikak and kudnashe. So it almost always, so if you're having the ka and it's turning into, there's a W or a U or a long O, then it's probably the compared to one. And if you have ka, then the first one's usually comparative.
That answered both my questions, because I was wondering why that always went ooh.
Right. Yeah. So when you see like yéik, it's this small, because the compared to one, for some reason it does that, because you're saying we're not really talking, we're saying we're comparing it to something, which gets really, the logic is really interesting to me, but also it tangles up my brain sometimes. And don't worry, we were going over this stuff. We had like an amazing elder in the room, and then he just looked at this, and he speaks Tlingit, and he says, it's like, yeah. He said, it's like my brain got tangled up in a seine net. And so it does, the confusing part is because we keep going back and forth and comparing English to Tlingit, which is what we do as we build a grammar up inside of ourselves. But so it's sort of like, hey, look at this thing. This is how it works. Now let's just go translate some stuff and keep an eye out for it. But Eventually with this game, I think I'll cook up a bunch of exercises to help us with all of this stuff.
It's this. I just have to say, goodness, sheesh. I mean, I'm excited to. I just want to say thank you for having it available as a draft because I think over the summer it would help my brain, like when we are doing translations, to go, okay, I've all had all these examples that you've provided in these, different preverb, object, and given examples, and so I just think this would be a great way to study for advanced Tlingit next year to just have this grounding. And I know you were saying you were trying to figure out what to do with the. I keep seeing your slot machine, that image. Yeah, and so maybe you could take that same slot machine just in the introduction and use your thick green lines. I don't know if you could superimpose those thick green lines over the slot machine, but for those of us who are so used to that slot machine image, just to put the green thick lines around it so then we know anything in the book that has those thick green lines or the slot machine image.
I think you told me to build a Tlingit slot machine. And it says Ká'w. Oh, I tried. Bing, 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 bing.
I like that.
Yeah, and we have had, one of our former students was really into computer programming, and he was trying to map this stuff out to see if he could write a program that could do all this stuff. And I'd be really impressed, because then you get into the next phase, which is like, okay, now let's start changing this and this at the same time with like the love verb, right? Because you got sikhan. So that part doesn't really change, but you start saying chet sikhan, itu sikhan, and you start sort of changing those in a very predictable way. Like we'll make this kha for me, I'm doing it. Then we'll go through all the possible object combinations and we'll switch it to tu, we're doing it. Then we do all the possible object combinations. And so it's just sort of a slow roll through, and we take turns just predicting what it's going to be. And that helps us internalize how these things start sounding when we start changing them. Then we start changing this thing. And that's where a lot of the magic happens, because then you might have three things, and then it's going to affect this thing, and then they're going to start to smush together. And that's when you got to start realizing the order of contractions. But we'll do that next.
I love that you call that magic. That's great reframing for like the thing that just freaks us all out. Magic. Okay, I'm going to reframe that now. Conjugation is magic.
I
Huh.
loved all my teachers, but one of my main Tlingit teachers, like day one, he'd always say, "It's probably the hardest language in the world." I was like, "What are you doing?" I was like, why are we starting that? So I lie to people. It's like, oh, what? Come on. Here's the fun part, right? Okay. Guna chi shuhan. So let's back up and catch up with where we're at. So we're on page 1. And we've got Yéil Wushlatish, Akashat Tuwati, Akashat Dahani, Ḳugáasʼ Shaawát, Du'ina Kayaaní Yéil. Ya Akinduwati X'éig Akashatach Tuwati. Yak Ishai ya Aksi, Kayaaní Áak'w Ḥwáan Aaní Káa. Tlak tutla antin, tlak du'in ituqallaan. Kallunatin qa'iguxlatlit. Yéil chayawsiqa, tlak isi tinke khattuguxlaan. So going through one at a time, Yéil wutlatish. Raven was lonely. Akashat tuwati. He wanted to get married. Akashat dahani, Ḳugáasʼ Shaawát. Du'ina Kayaaní Yéil. Ya akinduwati isik qashatach tuwati. The leader, Fog over Salmon, Raven told him, I want to marry your youngest daughter. Rakashatahani, Yak Ishai Aksi, Kaiketi Áak'w Chan yakrisaka, Tlak tutla antin, Tlak duin itukaslaan. It's good that you marry my daughter. One thing, though, you're going to promise me, always with kindness. You will always be kind to her. If it isn't that way, though, she's going to leave you. Raven says to him, I will always be kind with your daughter. On to page 2. Yahastu Aaní Yehaswuti, Hin Qashuchan. Hastu Tuwusagu Yakutan Kayes. Tak Hastu Kat Gud Kwa. Atcha Hastu Cheat Shuwahich. Hastu Eat Yan Uwaha. Katuwu Nik Hastu Kat Uwagut. Yéil Shat Kak Kone Awa Ak. Wanaxaya Yakakishayech. Kesh Atcha Haka Ye Nachta Uwu Atcha Kusti. Ye Awach Ewawuz Yéil. Kesh Ayag Du Eat Awutan. Just Tlak Da Ak We Kak. Okay, can I get a reader? And then we will start our translations.
Ya whoosh has udisha.
Goodness, sheesh. What do we think for this one? We recognize that we were looking at this Shah verb root quite a bit.
That's
Whoosh.
the marry one, right?
Yes.
So together.
Yeah, together is
marry.
whoosh.
Yeah, so whoosh in, whoosh tin or whoosh in is together. Whoosh or whoosh is to each other. Different, and so that's what pushes this plus D. So then we would say, then they married each other. Or we could say they got married, right? It depends what we're doing, but the way the Tlingit works is they married each other. So it's a useful phrase. You could talk about it. You've got friends that got married, then that's what you can use this one. But that's what the whoosh does. Whoosh, hus. When you have that, they did it to each other. Okay. How about this one?
Yahastu Ani Yehaswuti Hin Qashuchan.
Sheesh. And what do we got and what do we know and what are we not sure of?
This, them, their land.
Mm-hmm. Or we might say village. And what is this part, David?
Was that they existed?
Well, they, in this case, like, this is one of those, we just looked at those preverb things, right? Like yehaswuti. So in this case, yahastu ani yehaswuti. And I would probably say they were at their village, and this turns it into sort of a where thing. But I might just sort of say, I just might change it to that for just to streamline things a little bit. Yahastu ani ye haswuti. They were at their village. And then we get Heen Ashu Khan. Yeah, let's see if we have this one in there.
I don't know the Ashu, but Heen, river or water, and Khun next to or beside.
Yeah. See, I don't think Ashu is even in the dictionary. I was looking up eyelashes because someone was complaining about how hard it is to say kachtaqu. I was like, it's not that hard. What if it was called eyelashes of the little swans? That would be a hard name. We could name a school that. Okay, let me find. So this might be one I need to add. But first, as I'm looking up, I'll say water has a mouth. A body of water has a mouth, which is really interesting, right? So this is getting into sort of like the philosophy of how things work a little bit. Once you break the surface of the water, you've gone into the mouth of it. And so sometimes you're going to have some things like, especially like where the water meets the land, there actually is in Tlingit Tinditani a mouth there. So we're going to look up this Ashu. And I'm gonna just sort of recap. We read this story in English. I read a sentence. These two elders thought about it and gave me a way to say it in Tlingit. So if you don't see it in the dictionary, I'll put fresh links to this thing up there as well. Let me find it. So there's a database of nouns collected by Jeff Lear. It's not the most user-friendly thing, but it's the most complete list of nouns probably out there. So when you're looking stuff up, there's a couple things to keep in mind. One is it is alphabetized, but it does not make any difference. It doesn't discern the X between the underline X. It just doesn't even see it. But here's a sh. So we get limit, reach, avoid, provoke, say. And this is within reach of it, within the limits of it. That's what we're kind of looking at here. And sometimes you get some examples over here. Ducheni ashut ujahich. The dog ran to the end of its chain. But in this case, the English sentence here was their village was right next to the water. So ashu means hin ashu khan. It's next to that point where you could conceivably reach the water. Okay. So when you're getting next to things, it just gets a little complicated sometimes. How about this one?
Has tuusagu ya khutan khayis.
Sheesh. And translation?
They feel.
They were happy. Was that they were happy?
Yeah, or they are happy. They feel happy. What about the next part?
That summer and fall.
Okay. Ooh, a nice juicy sentence.
talk has to cut, good qua, has to cheat, shu, has to eat, yan ha, ka, to woo, ni, has to cut, good.
Okay.
Talk is winter or a year.
Yeah. So we're going to go winter in this case.
Arrived at them, came to them.
Yes. And there is a bit of a special meaning that goes on here. So has to cut is onto them. And sometimes when things go on to you, like it can rain on, like Hakat siu Áak'w Gsmåán. It rained on us. Hakat Ḳwáan, the daylight broke on us. Right? So you can have things that are like that. For something to walk on you is not a good thing in Tlingit. So when you say Hakat uwagut, it's saying something bad came upon us. And what's really interesting is cut good on its own is a noun, and this is not connected to this sentence, but it's another way to say diarrhea, which I don't know why. But when you say talk has to cut good, what you're saying here is something bad came upon them. Or you could just say, in winter, it came upon them. Or maybe winter came upon them, right? So talk is kind of doing the action. And then we get the thing. It's unusual because you could say winter came and then you can have something. But if you're saying cut good, winter came upon them, it's kind of setting it up for something very bad.
Aka is food or meal.
Mm-hmm.
Shuhuahi.
Anybody know shuwahi?
Is it tied to shoe? It's a shui, food.
Let's go look in the verb dictionary. Oh, we're looking up killer whales moving around. So we're going to look up the verb
Shui.
he, and we're going to look for the sh on there.
For he, I heard a story that's like tauk shuach, and that's like 1 year past.
Yeah. So when we look up he, so coming back to just talking about thematic prefixes, the way that these are going to be organized, with no thematic prefix going 0 classifier, then usually I think it goes S, L, S, H. Then it'll start saying plus D versions, and then it'll start moving into with a thematic prefix. Surface, surface, face, 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 voice, hand, surface, end, mouth, life, and in this case, we get shuwahi. And so we know it's 0 because we got shuwa, not shuhle. Run out of, end, come to an end, pass, be used up. We don't have qutr in front of it, so it's not to be killed off. So this sort of gives us an idea. And once we see atcha shuwahi, food's all gone. Tak shuwahi, the year came to an end. So sometimes this verb is used to just, sometimes it's not associated with anything negative. I could say, Jin ka tak shuwahi, 10 years passed. That's all I'm saying. But if I'm talking about people, And I said, then they had a hard time. Hashuahich, they all died off. That's a bad thing, right? So it kind of depends on what's being talked about. So coming back to here, this already sets us up for thinking like something's unusual, because winter didn't just come. Winter came upon them. They ran out of food. So we got in their possession. So you could say, Achchichuahich dana. It ran out of money. So this is saying it was in their possession, then it's gone. Oops.
Hunger arrived at them.
Yeah, what has to eat yan uaha? They are hungry. Yeah, and literally hunger arrived. You have this uaha, and technically, I'm gonna have to go fix this in the workbook. Yan is a thematic prefix. And
Sorrow came upon them,
yes,
or sadness.
yeah, either one, either one. Okay. Good job, translators. Yeah, Yéil. Oh, somebody else read it. What am I doing? Stealing your lines?
Ye shut kakune awa ak.
Goodness, sheesh. Look at the picture. There might be a new verb in here for us.
The raven's wife started weaving a basket.
Yeah, so this Áak'w is weaving with bark or roots, not with yarn. So there's a different verb for weaving with yarns, but also you can't use that one for barks, right? So there are two main weaving verbs. Kasne is yarns. Áak'w is barks and roots. Ḥuq is a basket, and here's that preverb. Qunay, started to. That means the verb, well, this verb is it's a zero. We'll learn how to spot that as well. But for now, we're just working on the translation. Raven's wife started weaving a basket. Oh, I gotta fix this one too.
That's what I get for waiting to be the last one. Darn it, I should have taken the one right before it. Okay, there we go. Wanach saya yakak isayach tles acha ha kayenachtua uwa acha kusti yewa ak ewa wut Yéil.
Okay. We're going to get to everything except for that one. And then I will walk you. There's something really fun going on here. So let's just start with that.
Why, is it something about like why you're building a basket when there's for no food?
Yes. And I'm going to just tell you what's going on here. Ha-ka, well, that's probably, that should be, I gotta go back and fix that too, okay. Klesh atcha aka ye nachtu wa uwu atcha kusti. And I'm gonna have to, might have to go back and look at this one too. I don't know if we need atcha in there twice. But what we have here is a compound. We have a sentence that is sort of turning into a noun, and it's also quite complicated. This verb would be aka ye yeo tu wa wu, or tu wa u, which would mean we put it in the basket. It is a putting, it's not a handling verb, because it's not talking about a specific way to handle something. Like when you say hand me that, you have to tell them how to hand it to you. That's what Tlingit does. It needs to encode that information. But this one is just to put something somewhere generally. So this is saying, why are you making a basket when there's no food we can put into it? This type of mode is called potential. And it's used in storytelling. So they'll say, at something they could eat. At they were looking for something they could eat. So in this case, wanach saya yakak ishayech klesh akaye nachtu atchakusti. I'm probably just going to cut it like that. Sorry, these are live fixing as we go. It was years ago when I listened to this. And when you're working with elders like this, sometimes you're having them piece together sentences and they're going back and forth and you just start writing stuff down. And then years later, when you understand more about the language, you're like, oh, we could have flowed this out a little bit more. Ye'aweh ach'ewawuz ya Yéil.
Raven asked them.
Yeah.
Oh, that is what.
Yeah, we'll say her because it's kind of established at this point. And so, yek'eh. You will get some of these things popping, and you'll learn how to spot them, and you will learn how to use them. Because once you've got this form, now you could say, Gwash aka ye nachtu u. Maybe we'll put it in there. Then you can also say, Klesh ade aka ye nachtu u ye. We can't put it in there or on there. But it is an advanced verb mode. I wouldn't worry about it too. If you want to start messing around with it, just try and say I can't, which is what people usually do. I'd say at this point, look it up. But if you want to know, it needs the conjugation prefix. So this is a na conjugation. It needs to have the qa mode, which contracts to the underline x. You can have a subject here. The classifier is plus I. And then you're going to have sometimes this at the end of it, or I, which will always be low tone. Okay, dog needs to go outside. I guess that's it. We got one more. We will do as much of this as we can. When we get back Tuesday, we'll probably just do this. And I will be uploading grammar chapters, all kinds of stuff throughout the year. Definitely look at the last chapters of X'éig, and then that'll prepare you for, I think, this verb component handbook, which will be coming up. But I'll put the version of it up that's where it's at right now. And then I'll also work on sort of, over the summer, I'm going to try and finalize this book so that it's ready and we could send it out. And then I think I'm going to take some of these stories and cook down smaller versions like we did, like I showed you with that talk story. So anything else before we go? We'll see you on campus on Tuesday. Sorry about that.
Sheesh. Tiadkin.
Goodness, geez.
Okay.
Kunal, I have a question.
Huh.
Do you have office hours?
Yes, they're usually Tuesday and Thursday, 4 to 5. But just send me a message because then I can usually, and then I could just hop on a Zoom. And
Okay,
we won't have
so
Thursday. It could be anytime Thursday.
okay, Tuesday, Thursday, yeah. Because I wanted to talk to you. I'm going on a cultural exchange to Hawaii.
Wow.
And so I always hear everyone talking about how they have to that moment when you have to stand up and speak. And so I was asked to do the closing thank you in Lingi. So I just want some direction and some cultural things to think about to help me out. So I'll try to see next week if there's one of those 2 times I can let you know, see if you're available to meet and start me off on my direction. So it's happening in May. So
Yay, this is wonderful because with that, because in the start of the semester I was writing like saying goodbyes to a dog, and I was writing all this sad stuff. So I'm happy because I'm writing wedding vows now, and
oh yeah, nice. So yeah, I feel honored, but so I want to make sure I can rise to the honor.
okay, I could throw a little Hawaiian in there, just a tiny bit.
Yeah, gonna sheesh.
Yeesh.